and give an opportunity to discuss this in various manners. I have the cell number up there to text your questions. I've solicited a few questions beforehand, so I'll get started on those. First of all, to Becca, there's a question not only on what trade restrictions cost, but also how it affects long-term planning, and what cost is it to our industry and others in just having this level of uncertainty at this point?
Well, I can say uncertainty breeds volatility, and you can see a direct impact in exchange rates and the market. I think that's an immediate impact that we see from the uncertainty. Is that better? Okay. Global uncertainty is one thing. So if you may see some risk mitigation in the form of financial tools or product storage. But if you're looking at uncertainty with a specific trading partner, Mexico, what seems to happen is we see a change in supplier, and which could be potentially permanent as those relationships solidify. So it kind of depends, but there's a lot of volatility and some immediate impacts and some long-term impacts from that.
Thanks. What comes up right away, Randy, is African swine fever at this point. And one question is on how non-tariff barriers essentially are determined, and are they negotiated, or is there enough policy?
Let's be honest. You heard in my remarks about foreign animal disease. Obviously, African swine fever is a regulated disease, and I think that's what becomes very critical. If, in fact, that disease does enter our country, there's going to be countries that don't have it that are going to immediately close to our export market. And if it happens to be any one of those top 5, you can see the impact that it's going to have on us. And so I think that's why we really need to have a concerted effort to keep that out, because any reason that can be given to close our export markets is going to be very, very detrimental financially.
I guess just along with that is there's questions on whether or not the U.S. should be creating some barriers, for instance, to Polish pork, for a country that has the product.
There's a fundamental in trade policy. They talk about regionalization. We actually do it with Mexico. In other words, so Mexico, we export 45% of our hams, very important to us, but also then reciprocal. Mexico wants to have the ability to send us back products that we utilize. That might be ribs and that might be bellies. That has a higher value for them. But yet they have some of their states that are testing positive for a foreign animal disease, and our APHIS program with the United States government does work with them to regionalize. In other words, so they won't have exports from that state that is positive, but those that are not have the ability to export. And so you say, well, yeah, good and bad, but we would like the same thing if it happens in our country. We would like it that depending on where the foreign animal disease comes into our country, that we can regionalize, but yet if it's negative in another portion, that we can continue to export. And so it's a very complicated issue. It's one of those that, we want it for us, but we also we have to be reciprocal to those countries. And so it does happen with the European Union in the same way.
Thanks. Becca, a question for you is on the $12 billion in support that is coming out for not only animal agriculture but soybeans and corn as well. Can that be considered a benefit to American farmers to which a countervail can be applied?
So it would be within the WTO's purview to look into that. Whether or not they will, I'm not sure. The $12 billion, we struggle with this because Cargill's long held the view that the way to maintain competitiveness and economic growth is just through open access to markets, through a rules-based trading system, and any sort of trade distorting subsidies do the opposite of that. It causes a less competitive ag economy and an imbalance to global trade and production. So it is within the WTO's purview. So it's just it's a trade distorting subsidy, essentially, from Cargill's point of view.
I have a question here, and I think I know the background. What is and Randy or Becca, you can both answer it. Supply management is being criticized in Canada as one of the distorting policies. Is there what's your view on it, I guess, is the question.
Randy, you want to take that one?
Let's be honest, I think it's about competitiveness, and it's he who does it best should win. And I think that's where you really look at us in the United States industry. We're the lowest cost producer in the world. We always have been competitive for the last several years. Typically, we got beat by Brazil, but the last database that I saw, we have some definitive advantage on our feed cost, the resources that we have. I mean, you look at the infrastructure that we've put together with these plants and our food safety. I mean, we're respected worldwide here. And so really, from our standpoint, we do actually have looked at some of the Quebec provinces. I mean, there's some support that happens within the province that really, in our mind, is not correct. But there again, we export to Canada, and as long as I think our product has the ability to move in on that playing field, I mean, we know it. We raise the issue. You continue to bring it up, but I think that's obviously the biggest hindrance here right now. So with the dairy supply management that's happening in Canada, it's having an effect on the renegotiation of NAFTA, and I think the President's talked about it many times over. So.
And I'm going to apologize. The number up there was put up wrong. It's 612-424-2558. So if you could re-enter it, I just got a text from someone who's getting questions about trade.
That's a good way to filter questions. Don't give them the right answer to the right phone number.
Some of you knew better, but please, 612, for those of us in the area realize it's one of the two area codes. Those of you who know me know it can happen. Another question that we've had is on soybeans and the fact that soybeans are exported and then soybean meal comes back. How is that, and the concerns about feed safety at this point is coming up as far as potential contamination of feed supply. I guess this is a question for you, Becca, on how does that economics work, and how do we take concerns about safety into account?
So the economics really aren't working for us on that right now. It really depends. It doesn't make sense, at least in large volumes. Right now we're seeing the price of beans is pretty low, so there's some advantageous results from exporting it to Argentina, what we're doing, but we're not seeing that meal come back right now. So we could crush it in Argentina and have the products exported elsewhere from there, but it doesn't make a lot of sense. And for Cargill, especially now with the tariffs, we're really trying to create a domestic market for our farmer customers and running our crush plants at max capacity, so doing what we can here domestically. And I mean, really, we're set up as an export country, so it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for us to import meal back. But on the feed side, I mean, where that does happen, I think we talk about biosecurity and food safety more than we do about trade, which is hard to do at Cargill. So I mean, we're taking incredibly aggressive measures. We have a global presence, a large team in China, essentially some auditors that are constantly looking at our suppliers, the amino acids, the vitamins, thermal treatment, just what are the practices that are going into place to prevent any sort of biosecurity issues around ASF and others. I mean, this has become, unfortunately, a trend that we've been seeing over the past decades.
A question for you, Randy, is on loins and tenderloins and the concern about the price for those. All of us notice the comparative value where we used to build a pig around the loin. It looks like we should build around bellies.
And so let's be honest. I mean, if you look at the PK 602, which would be our mandatory price report in the United States, you look at that value of that loin, what basically is in our cutout. Also, then you got to realize that there's a voluntary report that is for our international exports. And theirs can be as much as a 4x times higher price for those loins that go to Japan. And that's what's very disconcerting to those exporters that are there, is the potential, if we lose Japan, where we're getting a lot of revenue for our loins. The vast majority of them, really 80% of the loins are domestically. We don't see much potential for growth for that there, but we're getting a lot of value from that smaller portion that goes to Japan, and we're very concerned about that. The withdrawal from TPP is going to be that's disappointing. We need a free trade agreement with Japan, because the EU, and right now, exporters, I mean, it doesn't take us long at a U.S. Meat Export Federation meeting where the exporters and the traders, and they talk about how difficult the market is in Japan right now, and having the ability to get those products in, because product from Spain, product from Denmark are coming in and competing with us. We do have an inherent advantage that we can ship fresh chilled pork. I mean, that's our advantage right here. We can get our product to the West Coast and keep that product chilled. That's what the EU doesn't have. They have to freeze it in order to bring it over there, but they're still having a very competitive opportunity here that we're at disadvantage. And that's one of the reasons why we've really tried to develop new markets for these loins. That's where you're seeing us go into Central America, South America. Was just in Dominican Republic with John Schwartz in July here, where we were at a Latin American showcase for U.S. Meat Export Federation. They literally bring in all their buyers from these Latin American countries in one event, and it was really good. We did get out, and literally you had, I think it's for 7 cents a pound, you were bringing containers of U.S. loins, whole loins, brought into the Dominican Republic. They were processing and smoking them in the Dominican Republic and slicing them. And I mean, in store, it converted back to less $2 a pound here. So what we're really looking at is to be able to develop value markets. As you looked earlier, we're really trying to find the highest value market for each one of those primal cuts that we can, and it goes to different countries. And so that's the one that really right now, from a value standpoint on loins, because it is such a, they're looking at color score, they're looking at, product quality, how it's trimmed. We know that all our packers have that ability to be able to do that, and they're specifically targeting for that market, but they're very concerned if we come in at a higher tariff rate than the Europeans do or the Canadians, we're going to lose that market. Will we backfill into Canada if we do that? Without a doubt, but it's going to be at a lower value. So we want to maintain that high value market over the long term, and a free trade agreement with Japan is the only way we're going to get that. And just be careful. Pay attention to when you hear 232, that's the automobile portion of it here. We're very concerned that we're going to get sideswiped if something happens in the automobile that's going to negatively affect Japan and Korea. Those are, as you know, that's our number 1 and our number 5 value market, but there again, so just pay attention and have it on your radar screen.
There's a supplemental question here, is what are the efforts specifically to maintain that trade with Japan at this point?
Obviously, not only in Japan, but in Washington, D.C., we've been encouraging the Trump administration and the USTR's office, Lighthizer, that, we need a free trade agreement, with Japan. It's that much of important. But you also got to realize that right now their plate's kind of full. I mean, if you listen to my remarks, really the top one we really have right now is the Canada and Mexico. Stop and think, if our product is moving here right now, but it's at a 20 cent per pound lower, I mean, that's $10 a pig. If, in fact, that doesn't get resolved here, I mean, right now, we're still, even though they've agreed, the tariffs haven't been lifted. The tariffs won't be lifted until, they finally get the agreement through and it's signed by the current Mexican president. So you got to realize, if we lose that market, that's going to be very devastating to us. And the main problem, you say, why are these hams going to Mexico? Most of those hams that are going, they're in combo boxes, they're going bone in. We literally don't have the labor to have the ability to debone those hams, and so it's become very critical for us to have the ability to shift those into Mexico, have them have the ability to utilize the labor and debone those hams. And a lot of those products then are exported further on to other countries.
Thanks. Question for you, Becca. It's a question on quotas. How are quotas determined in opposition to tariffs or other barriers?
Quotas are, again, totally complex and way above my pay grade, but in theory, it's taking the U.S. production capacity, the difference between U.S. production capacity and demand. But the quotas don't take into account number of variables, including price changes as a result of tariffs or any sort of changes to supply or demand. So it's incredibly complex. I don't understand the entire process, to be honest, but I just know it sounds like it's a little bit of a flawed formula.
Randy, do you have any comments on determining?
You know, really the quotas don't negatively affect us that much. It's more over on the beef side to the EU, and they become very difficult. I've got a brother that was a cattle buyer. They're exporting, and all of a sudden they had a niche for beef products moving into the EU, and all of a sudden Australia's filling it. And so from our standpoint, quotas really don't have a very big impact to us, but they do in agricultural trade as a whole.
This is a broader question, perhaps both of you can answer, and I've got a few questions on it. There seems to be a short-term trade negotiation with long-term expectations that there is a tit-for-tat sort of negotiation at this point versus a long-term opening of trade. How effective is that method of negotiation?
You know, I'm going to go broadly from a perspective as me as a producer in the agriculture industry got brought up in one of the earlier questions. When I pour concrete, I've got a long-term investment. I want to have a long-range plan. I want certainty and some assurances that I can continue to export when I'm putting that much investment, be it into a sow farm, be it into a finishing floor, and especially gets that when you start talking about a $450 million packing plant. I mean, they're not 10-year or 20-year or 30-year investments. Those are multi-year investments. And so I think as you looked on those organizations that we talk about, it's what's so important to have the producer voice that's on there, because I do think we take a longer-term view here. When we have the traders that are in that room, they're just worried about the next container load of product that they got on the market. I mean, that's literally all the further forward they think. And so I think from a producer standpoint, yeah, it's a bump in the road. You kind of hear it, but really we have a long-term free trade agreements. It's the things that we look for because we do have longer term. When we're making that type of investments, we want to depend on that those markets are going to stay open, because just like I said in my remarks, it's a dichotomy. We depend on those, and when they get interrupted, you kind of seen, as the reference was made to the May futures, it dramatically impacts us.
Thanks. Becca, a question for you on bilateral versus regional trade agreements. What are the benefits and challenges to both?
I think the technical term is the more the merrier. That's essentially our point of view. Any sort of free trade or trade agreement is a good thing. Anything that's removing barriers to trade is great. But look at NAFTA. That's a trilateral agreement, and it's become the most powerful economic zone in the world, and that was done as a region. The other problem is if you have a series of bilaterals, you get what's called a spaghetti bowl. And it's a complex patchwork of rules with every single trading partner. So I think the more partners you have, the regional approach is that common set of rules. And that would be preferable.
Randy, any comments?
Well, and there again, look back. I mean, as mentioned, NAFTA has been very beneficial for us. You know, you put Mexico and Canada together, they're over 40% of our exports. And so NAFTA has, because of that free trade agreement, has been very, very beneficial to us. Anytime we lower those tariffs, anytime we get rid of the non-tariff trade barriers, which impede us all day long. But there again, now you've seen the settlement with Mexico, but yet, you know, it's being held up by Canada. And it's really not anything to do with agriculture. Well, it is on the dairy side, but it's more steel and aluminum. And so, you know, we've come to the conclusion that really we like the free trade agreements with each country here. We think it's very beneficial. We worked long and hard on TPP. That was 11 countries, and obviously the main reason we wanted to be in there was because of Japan. We also see a lot of potential in Vietnam. Really, when you look at Asia, we're going to have an opportunity to be able to grow our markets, but if we could drop it, but there again, you look at Korea. That was a free trade agreement on its own here. That's been in effect here 10 years. We're in there with a zero tariff duty, and look at what we're doing for exporting pork. That's where we're getting more value out of our picnics, more value out of our butts. That comes back to increase the cutout value that we have each and every day. And so I think those free trade agreements give us the opportunity. You give us, because of our competitiveness, because of the structure in our industry, we will increase our export as the chart showed within my presentation.
Okay, one request here. If we have one thing to request of our government officials, and you listed quite a bit there, what would be the one request that we should start with? And you've spent time on the Hill and in legislation.
Open access to markets. I mean, a rules-based trading system is really what we're preaching right now. I mean, that is everything that Cargill is talking about. The one thing that we want our policymakers to come away with is not only continue negotiating, don't walk away from the table and slap on some subsidies or tariffs. That's not the long-term approach. But the negotiation is progress. Maintain the access to open markets. Eliminate subsidies and trade distorting barriers, and do it under a set of common rules. So that's 4 things maybe, but...
I'm going to say NAFTA. I mean, if you got one right up here, right now, resolve NAFTA, that Mexican market. When it's typically those hams at this time of the year in the summertime, they should be trading at 70 cents. They were trading at 50 cents. The product's moving. I mean, even with the tariff that are on there, it's up 3% at the end of July. But it came out of my pocket and the other producers in this room's pocket. And so that's a $10 bill right there. And I think just because we won't have the labor to be able to depone those hams, so solve NAFTA, Mexico, very important to us. Then I think you need to go on to China, and because there again, that's I got it beat into my head many times over about the variety meats and the value of those, in the Chinese market. And if we don't have access to that, it's another $10 a head if we can add those products that we don't utilize within our country.
I would echo on Randy's NAFTA comment, but we've been striving for NAFTA 2.0, which is still a trilateral agreement. So if a bilateral agreement with Mexico may be progress, but it's then NAFTA 0.08. So let's go for NAFTA 2.0, which includes Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. It's not NAFTA without all 3.
Thank you very much, and please join me in thanking these speakers and this conversation.